On behalf of the Fallen Timbers Battlefield Preservation Commission, I would like to welcome you here today for our program entitled From the Fallen Timbers to the Treaty of Greenville. This year is the 226th anniversary of the Battle of Fallen Timbers, and it is also the 225th anniversary of the Treaty of Greenville. Every year, the Commission does a program near the anniversary date to honor all of those participants in this historic battle, the natives, Canadians, British, and Americans alike. Today you will hear from Dr. Janet Rosick, a longstanding historian on the battle, Dr. Mary Stockwell, noted historian and author of the newest biography on Anthony Wayne, and Xavier Allen, regimental drum major of the Essex and Kent Scottish Regiment of Canada. Plus, we have several historical figures, all whose lives were changed by the battle.
First, I'm going to set up some of the scene because this 45-minute battle is actually pretty important for international affairs as well as national affairs for the new United States of America. Right after the American Revolution, our key players are Britain, the United States, the Native Nations, and Spain. And at the Treaty of Paris of 1783, we determined that all of the land from roughly the Great Lakes down to Spanish Florida, from the Mississippi River over to the Atlantic Ocean, would fall under United States territory. However, Britain really wanted to protect their interests in Upper Canada. And so it was to their advantage to partner or ally with the Native Nations in order to keep them as a buffer territory between the United States and the British interests. Everybody was interested in the Northwest Territory for the rich resources as well as control of the waterways. Now, Spain comes into play because Kentucky was so close to becoming a state until the ratification of the United States Constitution. But it was very important to those living in Kentucky to have an access to key waterways. Those key waterways were the Ohio River and the Mississippi River. But Spain controlled the Mississippi River and had navigation rights of that river. American settlers had to pay very high tariffs to use the Mississippi River. All of this becomes increasingly important here in the Northwest Territory as more and more settlers pour into Kentucky, but also pour into southern Ohio. Native nations were arguing for a boundary of the Ohio River, while the United States government was arguing for a boundary north into, further north into Ohio. All of this comes to a conflict in the 1790s. From 1783 until 1794 at the Battle of Fallen Timbers, the United States and Native nations worked to negotiate peace terms. However, peace was not possible. Depredations took place all throughout the Ohio frontier. Natives attacked white settlers attacked natives, and everybody was gathering support from a variety of different resources. Unable to come to terms with this Ohio River boundary that the Native Nations were committed to, the United States and the Native Nations come to conflict first in 1790. Then again, they come under conflict in 1791. Both times, the Western Confederacy won. The United States wanted to really take a strong stand and gain control of this territory. They wanted to open it up for settlement, they wanted control of those resources, and they wanted to prove their ability to maintain and protect their frontier. This all came to a head on the evening of August 20th, or I'm sorry, actually on the morning of August 20th, 1794. Wayne's army approached this battlefield and came up here in parallel columns, and just about where I'm standing, they come they come under attack, I should say, from the Native Americans. Wayne's army, in the confusion of the battle, disarray takes place. On this side of the battle where I'm standing, you have the 1st and 3rd sublegions formed out into battle line formation. Wayne's in the center column, And on the far side of the park, you have the 2nd and 4th Sublegion. Wayne gives 3 commands almost simultaneously in the craziness of the battle. He tells the dragoons to ride to the river, turn the right flank of the native army. However, they can't do that because of a ravine system. So the dragoons make a decision to break through the battle line formation of the 1st and 3rd Sublegion and charge the native warriors. At that same time, the command is given to charge for the military, and at that same time, the 2nd Sublegion is called out of reserve and told to form battle line formation in order to protect the left flank of Wayne's army. So there is complete chaos happening in this 45 minutes. When Wayne gives that command to charge, the army charges and the natives eventually flee from the battlefield or retreat. As they retreat, they find no help from the British that are encamped at Fort Miamis, and the natives retreat all the way to the mouth of Swan Creek. Wayne's army pursues them, they regroup, and they are convinced that the native warriors are going to take another stand. Wayne keeps his army formed on the battlefield for about 3 hours before he determines a victory and sends the army into an encampment. At that point in time, the British at Fort Miamis and General Wayne exchange words. The British are here, according to Wayne, illegally after the Treaty of Paris of 1783, and he encourages them to leave the area. The British do not retreat at that point in time, and Wayne and his army leave after 3 days with no encounters with the British. This sets the stage for several important international treaties that take place as a result of this victory here at the Battle of Fallen Timbers.
I would like to introduce Major General Anthony Wayne of the Legion of the United States. He has returned to Fort Greenville following the Battle of Fallen Timbers and is awaiting developments on the treaty negotiations with the native.
Please wait a moment while I finish this letter to President Washington about my progress toward a treaty here at Fort Greenville. Please pardon my discourtesy to have you to wait. I am Major General Anthony Wayne, Commander-in-Chief of the Legion of the United States. I have a great respect for the warriors and the chiefs of Little Turtle's Indian Confederation. They earned my respect on the fields of battle with Generals Harmer and St. Clair, and now with me. But last year, on August the 20th, in 1794, the Legion met the Confederation on their chosen ground. We held steadfast, and we prevailed. Yet, I bear no respect for the British, who stayed in their illegal fortification, Fort Miamis, and failed to support their native allies. They also failed to avenge themselves upon me when I rode up to the walls of the fort itself. I want nothing more than to bring this conflict to an end with a treaty and to push the Redcoats back to Canada as quickly as possible. Before the battle, I was tasked by President Washington to bring peace to this territory by negotiating if possible. If not, then by war. All of my overtures to the Confederation chiefs were rejected. They had much encouragement from Alexander McKee, the great instigator. So, then it was to be battle. Once it was clear the battle was won, and as the natives and their white allies retreated to Fort Miamis, I halted my army over a mile before reaching the fort. Some in my command were very angry that I stopped the army from pursuit. But I had no intention of continuing the attack on the fleeing warriors or taking their women and children as prisoners. I believe that the British would fail to support their own allies, and I was proven right. The wedge of betrayal was driven by the British, their actions, or lack of actions, on that day. I could not take the fort with my forces, so I was content to confine the British within. My goal was to invite the native tribes to the negotiation table, not to destroy them. They need to know that the United States could be a better partner to them than the British, and that my country would gain nothing by annihilating them. We need to bring this conflict to an end now. I have no desire of facing these people in battle year after year after year. It was difficult enough to raise and train the army, the Legion, one time. It would be impossible for me to do it again. The war must end now. It took us months to finish our work in the north and then return. Before leaving Fort Miamis, we burned McKee's property and fields and let the British stew inside the fort, knowing they could do nothing to stop it. We then buried our dead and returned with our wounded to Camp Deposit, then gathered our gear and started our march to Fort Defiance. The men were hungry, and some did desert into the wilderness or into British clutches. We constantly scouted for an attack from the rear. On the way to Fort Defiance, I personally saw to the destruction of Simon Girty's property. That scoundrel and British supporter is every bit as bad as McKee himself, in my book. We also burned the native farming fields after taking some food for our own starving army. Hunger may be what will bring the natives to the treaty table yet. After fortifying Fort Defiance, I moved the Legion to Kikianga and built Fort Wayne. I followed the orders of President Washington that he gave first to Arthur St. Clair and then to me. The tribes will be less likely to fight us again if we have a fort deep in their territory. When I arrived back in Fort Greenville for the winter, I started my campaign to bring the chiefs here to talk and to negotiate a treaty. Before my battle on the Maumee, there had been several other treaties between the tribes and the United States. Washington sent me west to this region to secure the boundary agreed to in those treaties. The Indians would give up the idea of the Ohio River as the boundary between our peoples. They would live farther north toward Lake Erie, beyond the Greenville Treaty line. The Americans would be allowed to settle north of the Ohio River and south of the treaty line. Since I am now back at Fort Greenville, I have offered food and supplies to any Indians. The first chief to come was Blue Jacket. He came here in February, that's 1795, this year, telling me that the war was over for his Shawnee. Blue Jacket promised that he would bring the other chiefs to Greenville in the summer to agree on the details of a new treaty. Other Indian chiefs followed with the same talk. We provided them provisions and household items for their people, and they agreed to meet with me after spring planting. Even though the British wanted the Indians to keep fighting, the tribes decided no more war. They would make peace with the United States. They would stop attacking American settlements and return prisoners they had taken. I am so relieved that the war between our peoples will finally be over. Summer is coming, and I am anticipating welcoming back Blue Jacket and all the other chiefs to finally get this treaty done. For the first time, I feel confident that we can work out an end to the bloodshed on both sides. I am also happy to say that Great Britain, last November, signed the Jay Treaty, promising that they will give up their forts that they have illegally on American soil. I hope to live to see the day that they do indeed surrender these forts at long last and go back to Canada, where they belong.
When Anthony Wayne was sent out to the Western country by George Washington, he was given a very specific set of instructions. He was to raise an army, he was to train an army, and he was to hold that army in readiness, not to fight unless George Washington said, go into the wilderness, fight and defeat the Indians and probably the British allies. Why was he to wait? What's the problem? George Washington is negotiating with the Indians. What he wants is them to agree that they sign treaties, 3 or 4 of them, allowing the Indians would stay north of this treaty line, the Americans could settle south of it. It now goes due almost east to west through what is now modern Ohio. The Indians wouldn't agree to it. They said, we want the Ohio River as the border. And in the summer of 1794, Washington gives Wayne the orders. Start marching from Fort Greenville, head up here to what is now Fort Miami. In a legal British fort, you'll meet the Indians somewhere along the way. You must defeat them. He did, miraculously. He defeated them in this place. He was surprised that he had defeated them. He had tremendous respect for the Indians as warriors, but he has trained his men well. Once the battle was over and he takes his men back eventually to Fort Greenville, he worries because he still has to get a treaty. The battle is not significant unless the Indians come and agree to the treaty. He paces and paces Greenville. He's up on the ramparts. He has his men watching for people to come with white flags to surrender and to write this treaty. He's frantic because he said, I can't do it again. It was a trial to get these men trained and defeat the Indians. Finally, in February 1795, the Shawnee chief Blue Jacket, who had led the Confederation that fought here at what is now called Fallen Timbers, he comes into the fort and he tells Wayne the battle's over. We've delayed coming to see you because the British kept telling us, let's fight again in the spring. Blue Jacket says, no, it's over. We're coming in the summer. I'll bring all the chiefs and we'll agree to a treaty of peace. We'll agree on a border. Everything will be wonderful. Wayne now prepares himself because he not only respects the Indians as warriors, he respects them as diplomats. I've got to be ready to really make my case. When everybody comes into Greenville, all the chiefs in July, August 1795, he lays out all the treaties that have already been signed. He said, you agreed to let us settle south of it. You're going to go north towards the lake. We want you to turn your back on the British. They've signed the treaty, Jay's Treaty. They're no longer going to even be in the Ohio country. You can't rely on them. Live with us in peace, trade with us in peace, and we will be allies together. Blue Jacket stands up. I agree. I'm no longer a war chief. All the other chiefs, either reluctantly or a little more enthusiastically, agree. Little Turtle stands up at the Miami and he said, I never signed a treaty. We never signed any treaties. I don't know what you're talking about. And he turns the crowd at Greenville away from the treaty. The only thing that saves Wayne at this moment, not his ability to speak, not his diplomatic skills, the Wyandot chief, Tarry the Crane, stands up and says, I signed those treaties. I broke those treaties. My people fought the Americans. Maybe the British put the hatchet in our hands, but we buried it in the skull of the Americans. The fight is over. My fellow chiefs are dead. Sit down, Little Turtle. We will sign this treaty. And they did. They signed the Treaty of Greenville that divided what is now the state of Ohio between Indian Territory to the north. Americans could settle to the south. One interesting thing about Wayne, about a year later, when he goes to Philadelphia to tell Washington the battle was won, the treaty's won, everything's settled in the West, America can start moving west. This is my favorite Wayne story of the time. All the bells are ringing in the city of Philadelphia. He comes into the city, he goes, what's the celebration? And they say, it's for you, General Wayne. You won the Battle of Fallen Timbers. And he says, what? I fought the Battle of the Rapids. He had written a letter about the Fallen Timbers he fought in that went into the Philadelphia newspapers, and he said, I guess I did win the Fallen Timbers. He never thought the battle was as important as the treaty. The treaty opens the West for settlement. I think that's what he would want to be remembered for. It gave his nation 10 years, 1795 to 1805, for this flood of immigration to come west, and in many respects we're standing here today because of that treaty.
Eleanor Lytle McKillop was an intrepid young woman in the wilderness whose life was changed forever by the Battle of Fallen Timbers. Let's hear her story.
Sagadina, that is Seneca for how is your life? I am Mrs. Eleanor Little McKillop. I now live north of Detroit, a rough, uncivilized place. They tell me I was born in Virginia, but I really don't recall. When I was a child, my parents moved to the Fort Pitt area. When I was 9 years old, I was taken captive by a Seneca raiding party, along with my mother and 2 brothers. The Senecas are part of the Iroquois Confederacy. I lived 4 years with the Senecas. They called me Gronwena, which means little ship with a full sail, because I was an active child. My mother and 1 surviving brother were later ransomed by my father, but I stayed behind with Chief Corn Planter because he wanted me to stay with him. My life among the Iroquois was good, and they treated me well. I was happy there. When I was 13, Chief Corn Planter took me to a great council meeting at Fort Niagara. We were in a canoe approaching the site when I saw my white mother. I jumped out of the canoe and ran into her arms. Chief Corn Planter watched and said, "The child must stay with her mother, and I will go home alone." I was so happy to be with my parents. Then I met Daniel McKillop, a captain in the Queen's Rangers. He was so handsome and distinguished. He and I married, and we started a family of our own with our daughter, Margaret. A short time ago, Daniel was called to duty with the Queen Rangers to go to the foot of Maumee Rapids to be an advisor to our Native allies in their fight against the Americans. I have always worried when Daniel was off on military business, but this time sounded safe because they were not going to be involved in the fighting. But I should have been worried, because I just learned that Daniel will not be coming home to us. We were told that he died in a friendly fire accident near Fort Defiance. He wasn't even supposed to be at Fort Defiance. That's an American fort. No one will tell me how he died, or how such an accident can happen to an advisor. What is the most confusing is that many of the other militiamen that left with him are also not coming home. And many different stories are being told about what happened to all these loyal and brave men. I don't know what to make of this, and I miss Daniel so much. Margaret is only 3, and she won't even remember him. I feel that if I just knew what happened to him, that I could somehow deal with my loss better. I have been through so much. First, I lost my white family, then I lost my Indian family, and now I've lost my husband out here in the wilderness when I don't even know why. It all feels like just too much.
Xavier Allen, Regimental Drum Major of the Essex and Kent Scottish Regiment of Canada, has become a student of history and of his regiment's engagement in various battles. He is a great friend to the Commission.
After the Treaty of Paris, the British were very generous with signing away territories they had no claim to. This enraged the First Nations because they believed in British policies more so than the American. Throughout the Northwest Indian Wars and the War of the First Coalition, British North America's Governor General Lord Dorchester and Upper Canada's Lieutenant Governor John Simcoe continued to fortify Canada by anglicizing territories, building military outposts, mustering militias, and regaining the total trust of the First Nations. They resented for what was lost, and America was unaware of what was to take place for the next couple of decades. A very watchful eye was kept on America. There were still deep-rooted sentiments negatively after the Treaty of Paris because the Loyalists and the Tories lost everything. Everything from agriculture to slaves, tobacco to whiskey. They had to sacrifice and go to this new land of Canada. In April 1794, Simcoe and the Indian Department Adjutant Alexander McKee established Fort Miamis to support First Nations land rights. Militia regiments were raised in Essex and Kent counties, located near Detroit. In 1794, the springtime, France declared war on England, and British naval operations extended to capturing Martinique, St. Lucia, and Guadeloupe. America promised to protect the French colonies in the Caribbean, but refused to support the French Revolution. French-American relations strained, and the British saw opportunity. At Fallen Timbers, as General Anthony Wayne approached the area, Detroit's British commander, Lieutenant Colonel Richard England, placed 200 Canadian militia on alert. Canada invaded the United States. During the retreat, Lieutenant Colonel William Caldwell covered the First Nations withdrawal with 60 militia, 6 wounded in action, and 5 killed in action, including Captain Daniel McKillop. 4 other militia companies went to reinforce Fort Miamis. The First Nations allies were denied refuge, and 2 companies remained on duty there. Another conducted naval duties, and other companies returned to Canada. There was never a cover-up, and the British completely owned this blunder. The First Nations did have the impression that this operation was going to result in war with America. Canada's militia was not well trained for this engagement. The battle passed, and Jay's Treaty benefited the British more so than the Americans because economics were the priority. America's forefathers became divided, some pro-British, some pro-French. America owed millions of dollars to bankrupted France since 1781. England learned from their mistakes and returned in 1812, completely trusted again by their First Nations allies.
After the victory at the Battle of Fallen Timbers, Anthony Wayne moved back to Fort Defiance and spent the winter there waiting to sign peace treaty with the Native Nations. Several peace treaties came out of the Battle of Fallen Timbers. The first is Jay's Treaty in 1795, signed with the British. This helped to solidify control of the frontier for the United States and improve trade relations with the British. The second is Pinckney's Treaty in 1795 with Spain, which opened up free navigation on the Mississippi River. And the final treaty on August 3rd, 1795, is the Treaty of Greenville, signed with the Native Nations. This treaty opened up the eastern and southern portions of Ohio and pushed the natives to the northwest corner. A flood of settlers poured into the Ohio Territory, and by 1803, Ohio became a state.
I would like to take a moment to show you an interesting artifact from the time of the Greenville Treaty. This flag is known as the Anthony Wayne or Greenville Treaty flag. President Washington asked General Wayne to create a special flag to be given to the native chiefs at the signing of the Treaty of Greenville. This is a copy of the last of these flags known to exist. The flag was presented by General Wayne to the Miami chief, Shimakonish, or soldier. The flag descended to his granddaughters, and according to Kilsukwa, Wayne told her grandfather, "Keep this flag in sight, and as often as you see it, remember, we are friends." The flag was treasured by Shimakonish throughout his lifetime. It is now preserved by the state of Indiana. Next, we will meet our third of our historical figures. Born Frances Slocum, and later known as Young Bear, her life was also changed by the battle, which led her to her beloved husband.
Owahi Niatura.
Aweti Kanomi. Una moi. My name is Makanakwa, Young Bear, and I just spoke to you in the Otis language. I was born white in Wyoming Valley, Pennsylvania. I was taken captive by the Lenape when I was 5 years old. I don't remember much about my white family. My father was a Quaker, and his name was Slocum, and he wore a large brimmed hat. The Lenape, whom you might know as the Delaware, raised me in the native ways. I would break ponies with the boys. I would play the boys' games. This would have never happened in a white village. My first husband, he was mean to me. I went to the council and I told him of my troubles. And we took my husband's things and him and threw him out of the village. Women have a voice in our clan. That would have never happened in a white village. I was trained in the ways of the native peoples. We will hunt our foods in the woods. We will catch our fish along the Maumee River. We will gather foods. We grow foods. We grow gourds for containers. This is my water container. We gather fruits and berries. I was later traded to the Miami couple that was childless. They named me Makanakwa, Young Bear. They gave me my name. They also taught me their native ways of their clan. We lived along the Maumee River. You might know us as the Miami, but we pronounce it Miami. One day when I was walking through the woods here, I found a wounded warrior. I took him home. His name was Shipakana, and I'd nursed him back to health with my family. And when his health was better, he in return took care of my family and I. He was a strong man and a good man. Before my father died, I was given to Shipakana as his wife. My husband talked about his village along the Missinawa River, where people would come and trade for the expensive furs. I know that my white brothers are probably looking for me. I still have the scar on my finger from when my brother hit me with a hammer. Like other white children that are captives, when we're adopted into the family, we are family. We are replacing a lost child and loved, and we love our family back. But when the white people come to look for their children, we hide. We don't want to go back to the white man ways. I'm a Kanakwa Young Bear. I would be like a fish out of water. Along the Maumee River is where we would fish. In the winter months, we would go out into the Okopanins, and we would have an upland camp for survival during the hard, long months. I know that my brothers are looking for me, and if they come, tell them that Francis Slocum is dead, for that is my white name, Scanone. I wish you peace and a safe journey.
General Wayne was happy that the Treaty of Greenville opened the Ohio country for settlement, and he gave America 10 years of peace. In 1803, Ohio becomes a state in the Union. Already 60,000 people living here. But what happens to the Native Americans whose chief signed that treaty? For the older chiefs, the ones who had led the Confederation, like Blue Jacket, like Tarhi, Buckangehalas of the Delaware, like Little Turtle, who finally accepted it, they quit fighting. They kept their word on this document. They never raised an army or joined any army against the United States again. They did something else that was important in this treaty. They become allies of the United States. They accept annuities from America. They become dependent on the United States. They trade with American traders that Washington is going to send west, and they completely break their tie to the British, who have now gone back into Upper Canada. What about their people? Well, if you're living north of that line that cuts the state of Ohio in two, you don't feel the impact of settlement right away, because the Americans are not to settle north of that line. The Wyandot do pretty well in Upper Sandusky. Tribes in this river valley, the Ottawa, the brother tribes, the Potawatomi, the Ojibwa, they do all right for a time. Little Turtles people out towards what is now Fort Wayne, they too don't feel the immediate impact of this treaty. Who does feel the treaty and its impact badly? Anybody living south of the line. So the Delaware, who have been living in southeastern Ohio, they now have to pack up and leave. They cross the treaty line, they go out and they live along the White River in Indiana. The people who have it the worst are probably the Shawnee. The Shawnee are dead center in the line that Wayne drew coming back down towards the Kentucky River. They completely lose their homeland. I often ask people when I speak as a writer, I used to ask my students this, if you were a Shawnee and you're living in that old country, 1795 to 1805, what would you do? Would you go and live with the Delaware along the White River in Indiana? Would you do what other Shawnee did? They go all the way out to Missouri, and many of the Ohio tribes begin moving out towards either Missouri or what is now Arkansas. There's a great migration of people beginning as soon as the Treaty of Greenville is over, not just in Ohio, up and down the Appalachian chain. Or would you come back and forth to your old homeland, to Indiana, Missouri, and try to figure out a way to maybe still save your people? And one young man among the Shawnee makes a decision not to accept this line, and his name is Tecumseh. Tecumseh had fought with Blue Jacket right here at Fallen Timbers. He did not accept the treaty. He would not accept the loss of his homeland, and he wanders back and forth for 10 years, 1795 to 1805. Sometimes he's in the Indiana. Sometimes he breaks the rules and settles in his own country. Sometimes he goes out to Missouri to talk to the Shawnee there. Where should he live? What should he do? Around the year 1805, he makes a decision, and he makes it with his brother, who was a prophet. They make a decision to try one last time to ignore the Treaty of Greenville, to ignore what Wayne has accomplished, to ignore this tie with the Americans. And they put together a huge confederation of all the northern tribes, many of the southern tribes, and their decision is this: we will fight to make sure the old Ohio country, at least, maybe all the western country out to the Mississippi, is a permanent Indian country. How will they do it? By persuasion, by negotiation, by massacre, and eventually by allying with the British in the War of 1812. So Wayne gave us 10 years of peace, but Tecumseh from 1805 to 1815 gives us 10 years of war, trying once and for all to win this country for the Native Americans. He will lose badly. When the War of 1812 is over, a war that many people dismiss as meaningless, it was very meaningless to this man and his followers, Tecumseh. They tried to win this country one last time. Again, ignoring what happened at Fallen Timbers, ignoring what happened at Greenville, and they lose. And it's a time of immense heartbreak. And that, in turn, will lead to the removal of the Indians 15 years down the way. So this is a place of hope and tragedy for just about everybody.
Let's find out what happened to our historic guest here today after the signing of the Treaty of Greenville.
As those of us old enough to remember Paul Harvey would say, this is the rest of the story on our three historical figures. First, with Anthony Wayne. Wayne was born in Pennsylvania, and he served with distinction in the American Revolution and earned the nickname Mad Anthony. Following the war, he had a brief but unsuccessful career as a politician, businessman, and plantation owner. In 1792, George Washington appointed him commander of the United States Army. The success of the Fallen Timbers campaign made him a national hero in the United States. In 1795, he persuaded the Indian nations of the Old Northwest to negotiate the Treaty of Greenville. In 1796, based on the Jay Treaty, negotiated with Britain, Wayne happily took possession of Fort Detroit from the British. He suffered from gout, and after leaving Detroit, he took ill, and he died at Fort Presque Isle in current-day Erie, Pennsylvania, on December 15, 1796, just 2 weeks after the death of Major Campbell, his nemesis, British commander of Fort Miamis. With the exception of former presidents, no American has more cities, towns, counties, and places named after him than Wayne. Eleanor McKillop. Eleanor's life changed dramatically on August 20, 1794, when her husband was killed in action fighting the Americans at the Battle of Fallen Timbers. After her mourning, she met John Kinsey, a Maumee Indian trader and silversmith. They married in 1798 and moved west. They are considered the white founders of Chicago. In addition to her daughter, Margaret McKillop, Eleanor had 4 children with John Kinsey. During the War of 1812, the American garrison of Fort Dearborn in Chicago was destroyed by native forces, and many of the white settlers were killed. Thanks to their native friends who hid them, the Kinseys survived the battle. After the War of 1812, John Kinsey continued to build a successful business empire. Today, there is Kinsey Hotel on Kinsey Street in downtown Chicago. Plucky women seem to run in Eleanor's line, as her granddaughter, Nellie Gordon, was a Yankee and an associate of General Sherman, married to a Confederate officer in Savannah during the Civil War. And her great-granddaughter, Juliet Gordon Lowe, was the founder of the Girl Scouts of America. We did take a little latitude with Eleanor's story earlier. Sadly, during her lifetime, Eleanor never knew that she had not been told the truth about Captain McKillop's death. Finally, Frances Slocum. Young Bear stayed with her Miami husband, Shepacona, and they had 4 children, 2 boys who died young and 2 daughters who survived into adulthood. Shepacona had been injured in the Battle of Fallen Timbers, which led to their meeting. During the War of 1812, the Miami tribe moved to Mississinewa River Valley in north central Indiana. Her white family searched for her for 59 years. In 1835, she revealed her identity to a white Indian trader who wrote to a newspaper disclosing her existence. After this, she did meet 2 of her white brothers and a sister and their children. She refused to return to her birthplace, saying that she would be a fish out of water, but fostered an ongoing and lasting relationship between her white and native descendants. On March 3, 1845, the United States Congress passed a joint resolution sponsored by John Quincy Adams that exempted Slocum and 21 of her Miami relatives from removal to Kansas Territory. Her Miami relations in Indiana were among the 148 individuals who formed the nucleus of the present-day Miami nation of Indiana. Some think that by coming forward with her white ancestry, she saved her family from being forcibly removed to Kansas. Her husband, Shepacona, was a chief of the tribe, but when he lost his hearing, he gave up this position and established a trading center nearby called Deaf Man's Village. On March 9, 1847, young Bear died of pneumonia at Deaf Man's Village. She was 74 years old. If you had met young Bear during her lifetime, you would not have understood her. She had forgotten how to speak English, and her meeting with her brothers and sisters took place through an interpreter. I would like to thank our participants here today, Dr. Janik Rozic, Dr. Mary Stockwell, Xavier Allen of the Essex and Kent Scottish Regiment, Frank Butwin as Anthony Wayne, Amy Luck as Eleanor McKillop, Jan Lowe as Young Bear. And I would also like to thank our moderator and Master of Ceremonies, Joel Berg, and our videographer, Kyle Jazwicki. I would also like to give a shout out to Fort Meigs for allowing us to film part of our program on their property. I hope you've enjoyed our program today. Thank you.